But they didn't take the points that were right there for the taking. You could almost argue that that's just as disrespectful as scoring would have been, but you can't argue that it was running up the score. Welcome to the jungle, Bengals fans. I'm Kyle Phelps, and it's time to get out the brooms because the Bengals just swept another AFC North rival. First of all, I want to apologize for this video coming out a little bit late this week. The holiday season is absolutely insane at my day job. So, me and my wife decided to take a little vacation up to Buffalo over the weekend, and it set me back a little bit trying to get this video out. But anyway, the Cincinnati Bengals absolutely mopped the floor, or swept the floor, I guess, with the Baltimore Ravens JV squad this week by a score of 41-21. But before we get to that, I'd just like to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. It really helps my channel out, and as Dan Horde, the voice of the Cincinnati Bengals, always says, it helps more Bengals fans find this channel. Now, I mean, he always says the podcast or whatever exactly he says because he's talking about his podcast on a YouTube channel, but you know what I'm saying. If anything, subscribe and hit the notification bell because we do these recaps after every Bengals game. We do game previews with our excellent team of correspondents before every Bengals game. We do the power rankings for the entire NFL after the NFL week is over. And we do Battle of Ohio podcast clips twice every week. That's 5 videos a week for you to enjoy during the football season, so subscribe so you don't miss any of it. For those who want to dismiss the significance of this blowout win and a season sweep over the Baltimore Ravens, I'm going to borrow from Zach Taylor's perspective in the press conference on this one. No one dismissed the blowout 38-3 win that the Baltimore Ravens had over a beat-up and defeated Bengals team that was missing basically every major important player on both sides of the ball last year. In fact, a quick look at the headlines from that game yield phrases like historic output, dominating opponents, finishing strong, one of a kind, record-breaking season, Lamar Jackson can't be stopped, etc. So, miss me with dismissing the Bengals win just because the Baltimore Ravens were missing a ton of important players. I'm not saying that the missing players didn't matter or anything like that. Obviously, you know, there was some sloppy play that may not have been quite as sloppy if the Baltimore Ravens were at full strength. But the Cincinnati Bengals beat the Baltimore Ravens 41-17 in Baltimore earlier this year when they didn't have a massive COVID outbreak or nearly as many injured players. At the end of the day, you have to play who you have on the schedule, and the Cincinnati Bengals have outscored the Baltimore Ravens 82-38 in 2021, and that's just a fact that you cannot avoid. To me, the biggest deal in this game was the way that they won. They still got out to a bit of a slow start this week by failing to score a touchdown on the first drive, and honestly, I don't know how that happened because they hit for 10+ yards on 3 of their first 4 plays, and the other one went for 8 yards. So they were going nuts, and then they just kind of fell apart in the red zone, and I don't really know what happened. But they still put points on the board, and that matters. Unfortunately, on the Ravens' first offensive drive, the Bengals' old friend Josh Johnson, who started at quarterback this week in lieu of Lamar Jackson, who was dealing with that ankle injury that we discussed on the preview show, and in lieu of Tyler Huntley, who was dealing with COVID. We didn't even know that he had that when we recorded the preview video. But Johnson marched the Ravens right down the field on their first drive and connected on a 4-yard touchdown pass to Rashad Bateman for the Ravens to take the lead, and what ended up being their only lead of the game. At this point, though, I don't know all that's going to happen, so I'm thinking, crap, this is the same Ravens team that lost their last 3 games by a total of 4 points. Sometimes it doesn't seem to matter what injuries they're dealing with on a week-to-week basis. They always seem to find a way to make it difficult, and we might be in for a dogfight this week. Luckily, the Bengals just kept scoring after that. In fact, they put points on the board every single time that they were on offense, except for the last 2 drives of the game. The second to last drive should have ended in points because Joe Burrow evaded a ton of pressure and Tyler Boyd made an incredible catch on the side of his helmet for a touchdown. Unfortunately, the touchdown was overturned on a replay because the referees determined that he didn't control the ball all the way to the ground. And I'm here to tell you that's bullshit. Yes, he did lose a little bit of control of the ball when it made contact with the ground. But, like Gene Steratore said on the broadcast, he completed the process of the catch in the air. And since that's happening in the end zone, the second he's in possession of that ball and he touches the ground, the play is immediately over. Anything else, including a slight wiggle on the ground that happens after the play, is irrelevant because the play is over. Basically what I'm saying is Dez caught it. But whatever. The refs aren't perfect and the rule book isn't perfect and it didn't change the result of the game, so I'm not going to harp on it too much. And then Evan McPherson followed that up, 2 plays later followed that up with a missed 50-yard field goal, so ultimately no points on a drive that should have ended in 7 points. And then on the final drive of the game, the Bengals drove all the way down to the 4-yard line, and then they knelt the rest of the clock away instead of attempting to score. So you could really make the argument that they might as well have scored on every offensive possession. The final score of this game easily could have been 55-21. But, fate had other ideas, and I'm not going to complain too much about the final result of a blowout win because, a blowout win's a blowout win, and that seems like a bit of a spoiled perspective for somebody who's a fan of a team that usually isn't that good to actually take. You know who will complain, though? Don Wink Martindale. Remember that 38-3 win the Ravens had last year? He called Zach Taylor soft for attempting a field goal to avoid a shutout. Well, this time, the Bengals supposedly ran up the score on the Ravens, which is laughable because, like I just explained, the Bengals didn't even score on their last 2 possessions of the game. And on their last drive, they got down to the 4-yard line and then knelt the rest of the clock away, when they easily could have gone in and scored the way that they were playing. And it's like, yes, Joe Burrow completed 2 passes on that last drive, one of which was a 52-yard pass to Joe Mixon, but they didn't take the points that were right there for the taking. You could almost argue that that's just as disrespectful as scoring would have been, but you can't argue that it was running up the score. And honestly, get over it. Nobody got on the Ravens for continuing to pass the ball when they were up 49-13 in 2019. The Bengals decided to keep their foot on the gas this week because the Ravens have displayed the ability to come back despite incredible circumstances just this last couple of weeks. Like the 15-point deficit that they nearly overcame against the Browns in the 4th quarter 2 weeks ago, or the 14-point deficit that they nearly overcame against the Packers just last week in the last 5 minutes of the 4th quarter. The Bengals' 20-point lead in the 4th quarter this week might have felt safe, but against the Baltimore Ravens, you just can't be too careful, regardless of whether they're starting a backup quarterback or not. By far the biggest star this week, though, was Joe Burrow. My God, this guy is a great quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals. He looked like peak LSU Joe Burrow this week as he broke the Bengals' all-time single-game passing yards record with 525. And that beat Boomer Esiason's mark of 490 set in 1990 against the LA Rams and fell just 29 yards short of the all-time NFL record set by Norm Van Brocklin in 1951. Only Matt Schaub, who threw for 427 yards one time, randomly Matt Schaub showing up with the record, has thrown for more yards in a single game in the 21st century. In fact, had Tyler Boyd's touchdown that I mentioned earlier not been overturned by the refs, he actually would have broken that record with 557 yards. But that's not the only incredible thing that he did this week that reminded me of LSU Joe Burrow. He was absolutely elite at managing pressure inside the pocket. He had an incredible 86.4 grade per PFF when under pressure, and as far as I can tell, that was largely due to 5 mind-bending plays that he had throughout the game. The very first offensive play, he spun out of a sack and completed a first down catch to T. Higgins. The second of those plays was on a 1st and 15 near the end of the first quarter. He dodged a free rushing Tavon Young, pumped, ran around in a circle to avoid more pressure, and outran a guy who was chasing him, and then just barely missed CJ Uzomah for a first down on that play. Luckily, an illegal contact penalty by the Ravens gave them a first down on the play, but unfortunately, I feel like because of the outcome of that play, both the penalty and the fact that it was an incomplete pass, means that Joe Burrow's incredible pocket presence on that play is going to get missed. But I saw you, Joe. Then, there was a play late in the second quarter where he manipulated the pocket extremely well and avoided pressure, finding Jamar Chase for a 15-yard pass. Then, there was another play at the tail end of the second quarter where it was 3rd and 16, and he helped out Jonah Williams with a little step up in the pocket, with Tyus Bowser absolutely barreling down at him, and he found T. Higgins for a 52-yard pass that set T. Higgins up for a touchdown just at the end of the half. And finally, we already talked about it, with 6 minutes left to go in the game, he sidestepped a Ravens defender who completely broke through the Bengals offensive line, then narrowly outruns a sack by Broderick Washington to hit Tyler Boyd on a 32-yard touchdown catch that he reeled in with the side of his helmet. Unfortunately, we already talked about that play. The refs called it back because it was determined that after the play, Tyler Boyd lost control of the ball, blah, 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 blah. I already expressed my feelings about that play and how wrong the referees were about it, and I'm going to stay mad about that play because Joe Burrow would have broken Norm Van Brocklin's single-game passing yards record if it had been called correctly. But there's nothing we can do about it now, so I guess I'll move on. The Bengals also could have set another record on that same drive. Evan McPherson lined up for a 50-yard field goal after, it was determined that Tyler Boyd didn't make the catch and Jamar Chase wasn't able to get a touchdown catch on the next play. Had Evan McPherson made that kick, he would have tied the single-season record of 10 50-plus yard field goals across the entire NFL. Unfortunately, he missed it. So that's 2 chances at the record books the Bengals had on that one drive, which is honestly probably the only thing that Bengals fans can really complain about this week at all. Except, again, maybe the fact that they somehow didn't score a touchdown on that opening drive. Other than that, this game was all gravy. This game also set them up to potentially clinch the AFC North crown next week against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, worth noting is the fact that the Chiefs did clinch the AFC West this week. So, you wonder if maybe the Bengals can catch them sleepwalking a little bit when they come to Paul Brown Stadium. And they won't be resting their starters because they can potentially clinch the number 1 seed next week in the AFC if they beat the Bengals and the Tennessee Titans lose. But their offense has been inconsistent this year, and they had a close call against the Chargers just 2 weeks ago. So, why can't the Bengals come away with a win next week too? The Bengals' most likely scenario for making the playoffs this year is winning against the Cleveland Browns in Week 18. But with this win over the Ravens, they could bypass that entirely with a win over the Chiefs this coming week. And, weirdly enough, there's actually a scenario in which they can clinch a playoff appearance, which would be a wild card spot, even if they lose next week. But I'll go over that a little bit more in depth in the preview episode that we're going to put out on Friday. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. As always, I'll feature the best comments in my next recap video. Like this one from Arthur Schwanner, I believe that's how you pronounce the name. He said, "Great win on the road against a team that had to have it. On to the playoffs in only year 2. Awesome! Hooray!" Well, Arthur, the Bengals still had a little bit of work left to do to get to the playoffs after that win over the Broncos last week. It was a great win, but they took another huge step toward making the playoffs this week. Now, they just need to win one of their final 2 games, or possibly neither. But like I said, we'll talk about weird playoff scenarios in the Chiefs preview on Friday. Until then, you can always catch more of what I do at KylePhelps92 on Twitter, Facebook.com/LaPhelps, my Bengals coverage, which is available at atbnetwork.com/Cincinnati Bengals, the Battle of Ohio podcast, which is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and right here if you subscribe. But thank you so much for watching, guys. The Bengals clinched their first winning season since 2015 this week. So we've got a lot to be excited about, and I hope everyone is feeling fantastic. As always, I'll leave y'all with a hootie!